Well, we will begin. Again, my name is Rebecca Munich. I am the Deputy Director of the Ecology Center. The Ecology Center, Safer States and Michigan Green Communities is thrilled to have this webinar today on environmentally preferable purchasing or sustainable procurement policies to roll out a new roadmap for action and to highlight some excellent model policies coming right out of Michigan here. We have folks who are registered for this webinar from all across the country, a good number of folks from right here in Michigan, and then from coast to coast elsewhere in the United States. So we're thrilled to have you all here. We will be recording this webinar and sending a recording out to all registered participants prior to the, or after the webinar is over. So now I have the pleasure of turning the information over to Shanna Draheim, who is the Director of Policy Development for the Michigan Municipal League. Shanna oversees special research initiatives and projects related to the strategic goals of the League. She brings significant experience in community development, urban policy, sustainability, environmental protection, and so on. One of the programs that Shanna works on is the Michigan Green Communities Network. MGC is a collaborative effort led by numerous local governments, statewide organizations, state agencies, and others to share resources and knowledge around clean energy and environmental sustainability. Shanna, would you like to say a little bit about Michigan Green Communities?
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think you started to touch on it. Michigan Green Communities has been going on for better part of a decade here in Michigan. And as you said, it's a partnership between the Michigan Municipal League, Michigan Townships Association, and Michigan Association of Counties, as well as some state agencies, and then, of course, our local governments. And the idea behind it is really to be a kind of peer learning, information sharing, networking system that helps our local partners promote innovative solutions for sustainability, get sort of inspiration for moving their sustainability initiatives forward, to best practices, etc. And I think, the key part of our work is our Michigan Green Communities Challenge, which is an annual competition or challenge event, which is kind of a benchmarking program. So communities can go in year after year and participate in the challenge. And we just opened it up about a month ago, and it'll go through August. And so they have that period of time to go in and they track their sustainability actions in about 36 different areas, and they get levels of either bronze, silver, or gold. And so it allows them to benchmark their progress, year over year, but also against their peers to kind of understand how they're doing on some of their sustainability efforts. And we have about somewhere between 30 sort of active participants each year, a broader group that participate in the network more broadly. Last year, for example, we had 15 of our communities certified as bronze, 7 certified as silver, and 7 as gold. And between them all, they took over 470 sustainability actions that they reported on, and also reported on about almost 300 different sustainability metrics. So it's a really cool program. We're very proud of it, and it's part of a broader network of states, the Sustainable States Networks, who do similar programs in different places in the Midwest and East Coast and California and a few others.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to take a moment just to go over a little bit of information generally on procurement and impacts. Let me get my slides ready to move. So we want to introduce sustainable procurement generally and some of the things that states and communities are doing with procurement to make a huge environmental impact. Again, this is Rebecca with the Ecology Center. The Ecology Center is a Michigan-based organization. We've been around for almost 50 years now, and we work on multiple campaigns and programs to protect people from toxic chemicals, to address climate change, to foster zero waste initiatives, and to foster a sustainable food system. Our other partner in this project on procurement is Safer States, which is a national network of environmental health coalitions in various states around the country that work to protect people and the environment from toxic chemicals and consumer products and products that you and your states and cities may be using on a day-to-day basis. Safer States has a procurement work group, which brings together members of the Safer States Coalition from all over the country to advocates to work with state governments and local municipalities on environmentally preferable purchasing initiatives. So why do we do this? What we know is that government procurement really matters, that federal, state, and local procurement is over 20% of our gross national product. So that's a huge impact on the marketplace. From our perspective at the Ecology Center in Safer States, we know that when governmental purchasers put their minds to purchasing environmentally preferable products, we can move the marketplace and have great impacts on climate change, on reducing exposure to toxic chemicals, and so forth. So there are a number of different definitions of sustainable procurement or environmentally preferable purchasing. We have a few up here, one from the United Nations and one from our friends at Responsible Purchasing Network. So sustainable procurement generally is the practice of purchasing goods, services, and even purchasing products with better packaging that reduce the negative impacts on the environment, human health, and society. Sustainable procurement combines that socially and environmentally conscious principles with sound economic choices as well. There are three pillars generally of sustainability. Many of you probably know this as you come from sustainability organizations. And sustainable procurement is the practice, again, of purchasing goods, services, and making sure that packaging doesn't have negative impacts on people, the planet, or the economy. So at Safer States and the Ecology Center, we're particularly focused on the impact of toxic chemicals on human health and the environment. And while our procurement roadmap that we'll walk you through later in the webinar contains information on things related to zero waste, climate change, and so on, for the purposes of this presentation, what I'm talking about now, we'll talk about chemical impacts. So according to various biomonitoring studies, or studies in which blood, urine, breast milk, and other tissues are analyzed, virtually all people are exposed to a complex mixture of industrial chemicals, pesticides, and other pollutants. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention's National Report on Human Exposure to Environmental Chemicals, which you can see up there, which is a regularly updated analysis over 200 environmental chemicals in blood and urine of a represented sample of the U.S. population, demonstrates our widespread exposure to these chemicals. Many are the same chemicals that are found in the products that municipalities and state governments may be purchasing. So why do we care about chemicals in products? So unfortunately, these chemicals don't necessarily stay in the products themselves. Both in the production processes, during the use of products, and in the waste stream, chemicals people can be exposed to chemicals that have wide-ranging environmental health impacts. For example, asthma has been on the increase for the past 10 years, with 1 in 12 Americans now suffering from it. This is the highest rate to date. Some other cancers are linked to environmental causes and chemicals. Thyroid cancer, for example, has increased 3.6% every year between 1974 to 2013. And then you see other cancers like breast cancer, which is very common in women. And breast cancer incidence in women has increased 0.4% annually over the last 5 years. Shockingly, we see a 55% increase in pediatric leukemia, childhood leukemia, over the past 35 years, with links to pesticides, paint, solvents, and higher exposure to air pollution associated with an increased childhood leukemia risk. So this is the problem side of things. But cities have, and I'm focusing on cities for this slide, so you could scale this up to states, certainly. Cities have a tremendous amount of marketplace power. 80% of GDP globally is generated in cities. If you look at the estimated value of assets at risk for climate change, there's a real need to address this at $4 trillion. Some other impacts here on the climate side of things. There are many cities are reporting that climate change could impact businesses in their cities. That's 76% of cities, and so on. So we know that the impact here is great, and the need is great to act as well. So sustainable purchasing policies or environmentally preferred purchasing policies can have some really important cost benefits. One of the common questions that we get when folks are considering an environmentally preferable purchasing policy is, how much is this going to cost our state or our city or our community? And well, that's an important question to ask. It's important to ask the cost of not taking action. In fact, here's a few things here in terms of either hazardous management costs through the use of less toxic products that can be saved, operational costs through energy savings and more efficient equipment, again, a saving there, a lack of disposal costs for hazardous and increased solid waste within an EPP policy, and so on and so forth. So in addition to thinking of the actual cost of products, think of the cost savings when considering sustainable purchasing policies. And just the last slide here before we turn it over to our friends in Ann Arbor, there are some key considerations when thinking about environmental procurement policies, ensuring that they address these 6 issues: safer chemicals and materials to protect human health, addressing energy conservation and renewable energy to have a positive impact on reducing climate change, thinking about product durability and reusability, obvious cost savings there, protecting air, water, and other natural resources, reducing waste, increasing recycling, and following other initiatives for zero waste, and then, of course, protecting our ecosystems and our biodiversity where we live. So I'm going to come back to you all in a few moments to walk you through our new roadmap, but I really want to highlight a policy here that I think is a model for smaller cities to look into in terms of environmentally preferable purchasing. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Missy Stoltz, who is the Sustainability and Innovations Manager for the City of Ann Arbor. In this role, she works with all city operations, residents, businesses, the University of Michigan, nonprofits, and others to make Ann Arbor one of the most sustainable and equitable cities in America. Prior to joining the city, Missy worked with cities and tribal communities to advance their climate and sustainability goals as a consultant to philanthropic organizations, helping them integrate resilience thinking into their investment portfolios. Dr. Stoltz has a PhD in urban resilience from the University of Michigan, a master's in climate and society from Columbia University, and undergraduate degrees in marine biology and environmental science from the University of New England. Take it away, Missy.
Thanks, Rebecca. Just confirming, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. I'm so glad that you're here, and it's my great pleasure to tell you a little bit about some of the things happening around procurement in the city of Ann Arbor. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that really the vanguard behind much of this is a partnership between the Ecology Center and my predecessor, Matt Nod, who is also on the phone. So I will try to do them both justice. But if there are any really sticky questions, putting you both on call, they're going to come to you. So Rebecca did a really great overview of environmentally preferable purchasing. And this is actually taken directly from the policy that we have in Ann Arbor, where we are trying to do a number of things, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But one of them is introducing and acculturating our staff to the idea of environmentally preferable purchasing. And so what we say here, this is the way we've kind of simplified the definition, is that our city shall acquire goods and services in a manner that certainly, similar to the UN, considers both fiscal responsibility but also environmental stewardship, and that those two things don't need to be in conflict, and most of the time actually aren't, especially when, as Rebecca said, you're thinking about the footprint of our purchasing in a much more life cycle perspective as opposed to the upfront cost. And so that's part of the value of the EPP and the education and training that goes along with it. So you heard some of this, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate because it's really important, especially when you're introducing the idea of an EPP to perhaps the management officials, to elected officials, to make sure that you're really clear on kind of the value that this holds. And so as, again, Rebecca mentioned, we know that EPPs when you implement them, can improve health, right, by reducing exposure to a variety of different toxins and harmful chemicals. They can certainly reduce your environmental footprint by reducing the amount of energy, water, or material that you're consuming when you're making new products or when you're using refurbished products, for example. And they can also protect local ecosystems by emitting less toxins or pollutions into air and water bodies. And for the city of Ann Arbor, we sort of took that, all of those really wonderful values is kind of where we started, and then we were able to nest them in other priorities that our city has. And so this slide just helps interpret an EPP to some of the values that our staff and our elected officials are a little bit more familiar with. So we have some aggressive goals around climate action. And so being able to have this EPP walk in tandem with our climate goals is a really important selling point for us. We want to see energy reduction. We want to see healthier water systems, et cetera. And so this was a natural talking point for us in talking about an EPP. Of course, we want to reduce the footprint of our operations broadly. We want to empower our staff to be innovative and to demonstrate their leadership. This was really essential for us in that we didn't want a policy that sort of laid out every single thing you have to do all of the time, and here's what you can buy and only buy these things, because as you know, the market moves. That's both good and bad. Research continually tells us new things that we didn't know, both in terms of toxins that are out there, but also in terms of alternatives that are much more environmentally preferable. And so we want our staff to be able to kind of be on the front lines, being innovative, thinking about what their needs are, because of course, no one knows their needs better than them. And then we certainly want to try to move the market. And so this is about encouraging our vendors and our suppliers to make sure that they're integrating environmentally preferable goods into their goods or service offerings, and then making sure they're promoting those, not just to us, but also raising and elevating those goods to others that they may be working with, so we can start to see kind of more of a culture change around environmentally preferable purchasing. So that's a little bit of kind of the background. In terms of the timeline for us, excuse me, this policy has been in the works for a while, and this is where Matt and Rebecca and others have really spent quite a lot of time thinking about this policy. There was kind of the acculturation of it, the thought of it emerging in mid-2017. A draft policy was created in August. It was vetted through one of the city's environmental commissions. We have a lot of commissions, so we have an environmental commission that was helping kind of think about that, and our citizens really bringing their expertise to bear on how that policy looked. And then there was a number of months where we internally refined it based on feedback, based on people's concerns, doing some education. And then in May of last year, it was signed. And then in January of this year, we decided to reopen the policy. Not because we didn't think it was a great policy, we actually thought we could make it a little bit better. And so what we did, we opened that policy, we worked with the Ecology Center again, and we introduced a ban on styrofoam, a ban on plastic, and a ban on additional toxins. And this gets to my point about the research and the landscape changing, is that what's nice in having a living policy is that we're able to open it as we learn more about bioaccumulants in the environment or certain kinds of toxins. For us, we've got PFAS, which is emerging in our community, and that's something that we have since banned as part of our purchasing. So we've revised the policy, and it'll be signed, I think, next week officially, but it's still, the existing policy is still in operation while we're adding those additional elements in. So just to kind of give a nod out, this is definitely a team effort, and a lot of inspiration allowed us to be creative in terms of generating this policy, and also is really supporting us in terms of implementing it. So we have to give a shout out to our partners at the Ecology Center for sure. The Responsible Purchasing Network has helped greatly. We've worked with many cities in the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. We also have looked to our peers around the nation and some of the great things that they are doing. And here are just a few of those cities mentioned. And at the end of the slides, I have URLs to their different policies if anyone wants to take a look as well. So what's in this environmentally preferable purchasing policy that we have at the city? Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with all of the content. Happily, we'll circulate if anyone wants to take a peek at it. But what it really does is outline guidelines for how staff, whether that's staff in individual departments doing purchasing, our purchasing manager, or even those in the Office of Sustainability, how they can identify environmentally preferable products or goods. It also provides some ideas and suggestions for how we balance environmental and fiscal concerns. It also lays out who's responsible for what, because this is a big field. And so we don't want anyone to feel like they're completely alone in terms of implementing this policy. And I don't have a slide in here, but I'd be happy to talk about the different roles and responsibilities we have across the individual service areas or departments, depending on how you frame them, versus what our procurement does, versus what the Office of Sustainability and Innovation does to help make sure, again, that this purchasing policy kind of infiltrates all areas of the organization. The policy also provides guidance and procedures for soliciting and obtaining environmentally preferable products. There's draft language that has to go into all of our RFPs and all of our responses to council about why we're purchasing something, so that people have to be very transparent about the goods and the services that we buy and how they align with the city's values around environmentally preferable purchasing. And there's also quite a lot, actually. About half of the policy as currently written are details about non-supported materials. So this is really an educational space where we're trying to make sure people understand what kinds of things to be on the lookout for so that they do not integrate them into their purchasing to the extent they can avoid them. So just a few things I wanted to point out, because I'm sure if you're thinking about a policy or if you have a policy, you've had to deal with these kinds of concerns. So first and foremost, the policy does not require that you have to purchase something that won't meet your needs. So the most important thing is that we want to make sure whatever is being purchased can perform adequately for whatever the task is at hand. And in most cases, the more environmentally preferable product does do that. If there was an extreme case where the EPP product didn't, then you would not be asked to sacrifice performance to go for an alternative product. And this is kind of a case-by-case basis. We really haven't encountered this significantly at all. And that's because, like many of you, I'm sure, a lot of the things that we purchase, the more standardized things, are things where a green alternative exists, and in many cases is actually pretty close to cost parity, like cleaning supplies, with the non-environmentally preferable option. As I mentioned before, there's language that tells you exactly what you have to say to council, and exactly what kind of criteria you have to consider when you're thinking about either doing an RFP and or awarding some sort of procurement to an individual, so that you understand how are you thinking about and evaluating an environmentally preferable good over one that is not. And then if, this is also in the policy, if a purchasing manager or department decides not to go with an environmentally preferable good when is offered, they have to justify that. So we've got to start building documentation to understand why we're not purchasing certain goods. And that is actually information that our purchasing agent and Office of Sustainability is using to help understand how we can break down whether that's institutional structures, cost paradigms, whatever it might be, to help really make sure that we're surrounding ourselves by greener, healthier alternatives. One of the other things, Rebecca alluded to this, that we're working on right now, this is in the policy and we're working on some tools to support it, is that we know that goods and services that are greener, safer, might cost more upfront in some cases, but over the life of those products are actually far cheaper, whether that's because they perform better or whether that's because they don't have all these ancillary impacts. And so we're working on making sure that a life cycle view is taken when we price out products. So we're having to design, and we're working with some partners to figure out how to do this so that our different purchasing agents can make decisions thinking more from a life cycle perspective, or factoring the cost of what we would say inaction. If you stick with the traditional product and it's got some toxins in it, we need to understand the true cost of that product to be able to compare it to the true cost of a greener alternative. So we're working on this, but right now, the concept of a life cycle assessment has been, is introduced in the EPP, and is also something that we talk a lot about when we do trainings and when we work with different departments to really think about what they're purchasing and why. So in terms of our actual policy, we present both alternatives of what we want to see and also what we don't want to see. And there's a slide at the end that lists a lot of different things that we call out, but this is just kind of a higher level example. We are talking about products that reduce or eliminate things like persistent bioaccumulative toxins, air emissions, water pollutants, things that are reducing the amount of waste that is generated, things that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions or the energy that's used when we're using a piece of equipment, that are reducing the amount of natural resources that we're using, especially virgin natural resources. things that reduce the impact on human health or biodiversity. And we need, the city just decided to ban all plastics and styrofoams. We cannot do that in the community. We can only do that in terms of our own operations. So our Parks Department has already moved forward in implementing this and is just phasing out existing stock and inventory, and then is moving towards biodegradable alternatives, which we're pretty excited about. What we want to support are things that enhance the recyclability or the percent of recycled content in things. So we want to see much more reuse. We want to see more efficient products powered with renewable energy. We want to see things that benefit human health and the environment, as well as kind of broadly speaking, sustainable practices. And I know we're really focusing on goods here, but this is also about services. So we want to start seeing businesses that share our values around environmentally preferable purchasing and kind of leading towards a more sustainable world for all. So these are some of the things when I said are about half of our policy focuses on education. So we actually use this as an opportunity to talk to people about the things they should be looking for in procurement. And this is look for primarily because we want products that are these, but there are also some, I think I'd transition them all to be things that we want. So things like asthmagen-free, or bio-based, or compostable, or PFAS-free, for example. And there are many, many more. This is, I think, about 2/3 of the things that we call out in the policy. So as you probably can deduce, this is a lot of material. So one of the things that I pulled a slide out of, but I do want to put a pin in for a quick second, is to say that the role of the Office of Sustainability and Innovation isn't to implement this policy, because we have a decentralized purchasing process where all of the individual service units are able to purchase their goods and services. So what we're trying to do is make it really easy for people. So we have taken a list of the top things that the city buys, and we're working with our vendors to make sure the only alternatives offered are environmentally preferable, greener alternatives, healthier alternatives. So when people go to buy, that's just what they buy. So we're not making them have to know all of the words written on this screen. We're trying to just make it super easy for them to do the right thing by just filtering out the things that we don't want them to purchase. We also do a lot of education working with our procurement department, and we also do kind of in-house consulting. So for example, our fire chief sat through a training on the policy and was really interested, but came to us and said, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me? And so we did a walkthrough with him, and we identified all of the different things. We started with cleaning supplies that they're purchasing, and then we came back and provided alternatives that actually were on cost point with what they're currently spending, and we're doing tests to make sure they meet performance. And so far, so good. But it's basically helping normalize this concept and also making it really, really, really easy for our peers to do this and to implement the policy. And so in that educational space, I just want to point out that we are really encouraging people to look at third-party sites, and we are too, to really understand where we've got third-party labeling that just helps make it easier, right? So if we know that we can look for Green Seal certified products, and those products are going to clear our procurement process and meet our goals, that makes it really easy for our folks who are out purchasing. Or if we know they can look for Energy Star appliances, and those will have greater value than alternatives. These are the kinds of things we're trying to help really understand and teach people about these reputable environmental labeling systems that are out there. So that's super important. The flip side, we're also trying to help people understand the greenwashing movement that exists, because a lot of money is going towards branding or marketing things as being environmentally preferable without really any context or content around what that means. And so we're trying to teach people how to stay away from unsubstantiated claims, making sure there's actually credible evidence, and that they're talking about products or toxins or goods and services that actually make sense. And so we've got this fun little, we point people to this little quiz. We're working to do kind of fun activities to help people understand greenwashing, to help them understand which are really good third-party certified labels, et cetera. So this gets back to the role of our office really being kind of that education and engagement around this, normalizing it and making it fun so people can implement it. So with that, I'm going to stop. I think, Rebecca, am I kicking it back over to you just for a minute here?
Yeah, I'm going to walk through the roadmap, but while I get my screen ready to project, I do have a question for you. So are additional staff required to administer, or have you been able to use existing staff? The city that this person is working with is concerned about the staffing requirements to implement the policy. So I'll have you answer that question as I switch things over, and then we have a few others that I think we'll hold to the end.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have used existing staff to do this. We certainly use interns to help supplement capacity for sure. In particular, I'd say that's been really valuable with things like setting up the training slides or organizing the logistical part of this, which just eats up far more time than I think any of us have. That's been really helpful to use kind of our interns or our temp employees. But we haven't hired any new staff. We, in fact, only have one person in our city's purchasing office because we're decentralized. So if anything, I imagine many other municipalities have more staff than we do to move this forward. So it's still a heavy lift. We're still figuring it out, but I think it is something that's possible with a pretty lean team.
Great, thank you very much. We have a couple of other questions coming through, and we'll get back to those in a moment, but we're hoping that maybe some questions will be answered as we walk through the new Sustainable Procurement Roadmap. So this is, again, a project with Safer States and the Ecology Center. And the reason this came about is in working with the folks in Ann Arbor, Missy, and others, and in other cities and states around the country, there are a number of different questions that we were answering on environmentally preferable purchasing or sustainable procurement, and how to, one, learn about some of the foundations of how do you think about procurement if you're not a procurement professional yourself. How do you go about creating a sustainable procurement policy or an environmentally preferable policy, implementing one once you have it, and then really making it the best it possibly can be by training your staff, setting goals, and measuring the impact of your policies. So as you can see up there, there is a little URL, and we'll chat that out to folks as well, so you can look at that. And you're welcome to look along with us as we walk through the roadmap today. And I'm going to switch my screen here. All right, so this is the new Sustainable Procurement Policy Roadmap, again, created by Ecology Center and Safer States. And what we wanted to do is really create a curated set of resources. There are incredible resources out there on sustainable procurement. However, sometimes it can be overwhelming, particularly if you're just at the beginning of looking into these into creating a policy or implementing a policy. So what we wanted to do is create a 4-step process on the website that could be updated with best practices and policies and specifications over time, to have something that's dynamic for advocates, working with communities and states to be able to use, for sustainability professionals in those different areas of government, and procurement professionals to go to as a one-stop shopping, if you will, to find some initial introductory information on how to think about procurement policies. So as you can see on the web page here, there are 4 steps. The first, and I'll go through each of these, foundation building. We put a general audience here. This may be folks who don't know much about procurement generally, so it's going to be most useful for sustainability professionals, environmental advocates, and even community members and leaders like your councils or your state lawmakers or folks like that. So this is a good place to go and learn a little bit more as we dig in here in a moment about the procurement process, and then about sustainable procurement generally. Once you have that foundation built, we think it's important for folks to move into thinking about, well, how do I actually go about creating a sustainable procurement policy or environmentally preferable policy? And again, we've got our audience here, and a number of resources, including guides and specifications, a curated list of, I'm sorry, not specifications, model policies from states and communities, cities, and some webinars that have been curated, again, for you to be able to get a sense of how do you go about creating something like that. Step 3 is moving into where Ann Arbor is right now. How do you implement your policy once you have it on the books? What are some of the key things that you could look at, like specifications for certain product categories, contract language that you could put in for your janitorial supplies contracts, for example, and other things along those lines. And then finally, that training, goal setting, and measuring impact, because it's important when you're embarking on this process that you have a sense of whether or not, like in Ann Arbor, you have sort of very distributed purchasing across many different departments, and how do you go about implementing training when you have to train many different people to do purchasing? How do you set up the goals for your policy? What are you looking, what are you looking to move the needle on? And then how do you measure that in the end? So let's dig in a little bit on step 1. So this is, again, our foundation building. What you're going to find in this section is some background information on things that are important to think about purchasing generally. So the first thing here is some information about cooperative purchasing organizations. Those are larger organizations that can help to develop and administer contracts that can be used by state and local governments, various institutions, and so on. There are many benefits to purchasing cooperatively. Obviously, you get economies of scale when you have folks join together. We've highlighted 2 different partners here. So NASPO, or National Association of State Procurement Officials. It's important to note that you do not have to be a state procurement official, that local cities and other entities can participate as well. And then Omnia Partners, Public Sector, which was formerly U.S. Communities Government Purchasing Alliance. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these, but just sort of show you what's here, and we can always dig in if there are questions. There are a number of organizations that we at the Ecology Center in Safer States want to acknowledge their leadership and the incredible wealth of resources available on sustainable procurement. The first of these are the folks over at Responsible Purchasing Network, and you'll see on the roadmap links to all of these organizations. They have a host of webinars, of resources, and they also provide consulting services to governmental bodies or institutions to think about developing a procurement policy and implementing one, measuring impact, and so on. So Responsible Purchasing Network, in addition to Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, are terrific ways, terrific organizations to view, to visit, to take advantage of their free resources. And then as you're considering your policy, considering joining those organizations as members to have those additional resources available behind the paywall of their membership program. On the other side of things, there are a couple of other nonprofits that we want to highlight here. The Center for Environmental Health has terrific procurement resources and is often putting together great webinars specific to environmental health issues and how different institutions can purchase. Healthcare Without Harm, although we're not focused in this webinar on institutional purchasers, is really a leader in this area and has done a terrific amount of work to come up with specifications for different products that are used in office environments and obviously in hospitals, and find more information there. One of the things that Missy mentioned is third-party certifications and how useful that is as a way to think about procurement and what to buy or what not to buy. We have a couple of resources here and a great webinar for folks to take a look at, which actually includes information on what Missy was talking about in terms of choosing products with eco logos, as they say here, and avoiding greenwashing. That webinar is from our friends at NASPO. And then an intro webinar from, again, the great folks at Responsible Purchasing Network on a Sustainable Purchasing 101 to give you more than you're going to get out of this webinar on this. So I want to be mindful of our time. I'm going to move a little bit more quickly through the next couple of steps so we have time for Q&A. So in step 2, this is when you're ready to create an environmental purchasing policy. We have created a list of model city policies. It's important to note that we are not suggesting that these are all of the model policies. We've curated just a few to give you a sense of what's out there. We have Ann Arbor's policy from 2018, and we'll put the 2019 up there as soon as it's available. You can view each of these policies to learn more. You can see that we've listed best practices in any number of the policies, and sometimes there are links to very specific factors in the policy. We have city level policies and state level policies here. And then again, a webinar by our friends at Responsible Purchasing Network talking about how the cities of Portland, Oregon, and Santa Monica, California are implementing their EPPs. So at step 3, we really get into the weeds on specifications and guides that communities can use to implement their environmentally preferable purchasing policies. So you'll see here that we've categorized things typically by an area where you would use them, like childcare, or by certain product categories, building products, etc. And you can see there's a long list of different products here. I want to take us down to the bottom here. We're not going to go through any of these in any detail, but we do have a couple of different sources here. San Francisco Approved is a website that is really useful if you're missing something here, if you're looking for a particular specification, let's say on interior paints. San Francisco Approved has a really amazing purchasing policy and has lists of different products, lists of specifications for many different types of products that you can peruse. New York State, and under their Executive Order 4, also has I believe it's over 51 approved specifications. So those are some good resources there. So then moving on to step 4. So what do you do once you've implemented your policy? And this really could go back in terms of the goal setting and measuring impact, could go back into something you need to think about when you're developing your policy. But we wanted to think about training. Many of the trainings that are available publicly right now are webinar-based. We highlight a few organizations here that have lists of various webinars. Responsible Purchasing Network has many webinars on many different topics related to procurement. Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council has a handful of excellent webinars as well, with a particular focus on chemicals and what they have available to the public. And then NASPO has a whole YouTube channel on green purchasing webinars. So again, we've curated a few of those webinars from these different sources for this website, but I would encourage you as you're digging in to go on and develop more training. What the Ecology Center in Safer States is hoping to be able to do is to actually be able to create some additional training that is interactive and less of a webinar based. So we're seeking out the resources to do that, at least with an intro, for folks to have an interactive way of learning about procurement rather than just sort of the passive way of watching a webinar. There are some resources here to think about as you're developing your policy and as you're rolling it out, how you can measure impact, some model evaluation examples coming from the state of Minnesota and the state of Massachusetts, and so on. So I went through things very quickly there because I wanted to have at least 15 minutes for questions. So I'm going to open it up and look at the questions here from folks. And I'm going to go back in to that slide that has our roadmap, sorry. This one here, so that you can see that website as we answer questions. Okay, so Missy, I think this one is for you as well. So you mentioned third-party certifications in your presentation. Are you relying wholly on those, or are you doing some internal evaluation of alternatives? For example, are you using specifications? Are you looking to develop those? What's your next step on that side of things?
It's a combination, and this is actually a really good kind of follow-up to the question about capacity. So while we're at limited capacity, we're really relying heavily on third-party certification. But as we hopefully ramp up here in the summer with a whole bunch of interns coming on board, a lot who have interest in this topic, we're hoping to do a much kind of deeper and more granular analysis for ourselves of what products kind of align with our values and we'd like to be supporting. But this is a case where, in absence of capacity, we really are going to have to lean pretty heavily on third-party certification.
Excellent. And the other thing I would recommend folks is if we go back to that roadmap in looking at San Francisco approved, that's a terrific list where you can find certain types of product categories. In our roadmap, we have, let's go back here. I'm going to show you, perhaps if I can get my computer to work for me. If we go to the roadmap here on implementing side of things, there are certain lists of products that can be used to actually guide a city. Under NASPO, Minnesota led the production of this furniture product database, which actually lists different suppliers and companies. And so this is available on the website for you to see if you're going and you're looking for seating or desks and tables. This information is there. You can see the company again, the product, and then so the specifications and clarification that it meets these. This is the Healthier Hospitals compliant, which is a really excellent set of specifications on furniture to ensure they're environmentally preferable. So there are those resources, and then as I mentioned again, let's just click on it here. San Francisco approved. I think we may have some folks from San Francisco on the line, but they have this incredible list of products and services available, and other cities can take a look at them and help to build your products there, your list of approved or not approved products for purchasing. Okay. So another question we had, let's see. Missy, I think you answered this to the person who asked it, but I think it would be useful here for the whole group. What's the time frame that you have for development and implementation of the LCA approach or life cycle analysis approach when determining cost and benefit?
Yeah, so we have started doing some research into what peer cities have done, especially what corporations have done, because they're pretty advanced in thinking about this. And this is another point of capacity where one of our summer interns, their entire task is focused on the policy and helping develop the life cycle analysis. So we anticipate we'll have something at least for internal discussion and ideally piloting by end of the year.
Great. Another question came out about the roadmap. The roadmap is on our website and it's publicly available now. And then if I go back here, you can use this URL. This is a short URL or the longer version here. And again, we'll get that. I'll chat that out to folks right now so you have it. Okay, looking at our questions here. I have a question for you, Missy, in terms of the next steps in implementing the policy. What are the sorts of things that you think a mid-sized city like Ann Arbor really needs to be able to put what is a really terrific policy into action? What are the resources that are most important to you?
Do you mean internally, like what our next steps and resource needs are, or do you mean like from external agents, what kind of help we could use?
How about both?
Dang it. Okay, sure.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's a good question. I think the most important thing right now is we have got to teach people about this policy, and not just about the policy, but about the essence of it and what it really means, and make it super easy for people to do it. So we're working, as I mentioned before, with our vendors like Staples and Office Depot and our cleaning supplies, and we're opening up our contract with the cleaning crew to see where we can push environmentally preferable products to the fore. And so that's our biggest need, I think, is both educating people about what exists and then making it super easy for them just to adhere to it, even if they don't know about it, because that's just what they buy. And that's actually not proving super complicated at all to do. It's a little bit political, of course, when you're talking about your cleaning contract. We have just started that process and found when we frame that from the standpoint of we want to make sure that all the people you employ to help keep our offices clean and healthy also get to be healthy, that is resonant. The question comes in about, of course, the additional cost, if there's any for the materials, or the fact that they may already have a lot of supply that they'd have to work through. So we're kind of navigating that space right now. But it's all of that feels easy to me. You know the answer, you can kind of work around it. It just takes some time to do it. So I'm pretty excited about where this policy could go. In terms of external agents, gosh, I think it is invaluable having a partnership with the Ecology Center or RPN or others who are really staying abreast of the science and what's happening and what we're learning about different materials and how they affect the human body and the environment, because there's just no way we could stay on top of all of that research as it's emerging. And then also the alternatives, what really are good products. So I know LA has, or San Francisco has that kind of screen and filter, being able to use that from our peer cities or use our nonprofit allies to help us figure out what are the good things we should be promoting is just really, really essential, because like many things, this landscape doesn't sit still. So it's just constantly changing. And I don't think we would have the capacity or the technical expertise to be able to stay on top of it.
Terrific. I have a question, Missy, this could either be for you or I know Matt's on the line as well. When we think back to developing the policy, I know we have a number of partners here who are at the very initial stages of thinking about, they want to do an EPP, but how do you go about it? What are the most important first sorts of things to think about in that process?
I would love to hear Matt's response on that, since he really is the originator.
Sure. If folks can hear me, I think, the main thing for us was, again, credit to the Urban Sustainability Directors Network for putting a group of cities together with the Responsible Purchasing Network to come up with this toolkit on developing these. And that's all available on the USDN website. So
it's
I think
also on our roadmap.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to go out to your colleagues and elected officials when you say, we're not the first to do this. A bunch of cities have gotten together and think this is the best way to proceed. So, and I think in a lot of cases, you don't want to go forward with a plan or policy without all the resources to implement it. But sometimes it's better to get the policy out there and get people to start paying attention, and then build the resources you need to fully implement it.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. And I just pulled that up there so folks can see it. And again, it's on the toolkit, so you'll have an easy link the roadmap to the playbook. Many different similar names here. We'll give folks another moment for questions. I have a question for Shanna. I believe that creating a EPP is on the list of things to do that cities in Michigan can do to meet the Michigan Green Communities Challenge. Could you talk a little bit about that?
It is, and I'm trying to pull up my actual checklist here.
You're just a little bit hard to hear.
Okay, sorry. It is on there. I'm trying to pull up my checklist to find the exact language, but I know Jamie's on. If she's got it handier or wants to jump in, that's fine. But yes, it is one of the actions that people can take in terms of, we have several things in the challenge that are sort of planning oriented or policy oriented. So I'm sorry, I'm looking for to see if I can see the language. But yes, it is one of the things where we focus on sort of policy changes that locals can do as part of their sustainability activities.
Terrific. Thank you. All right, I am not seeing any more questions unless any of our panelists have questions for their fellow panelists. We will get ready to wrap it up. And as I mentioned, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar. And let me pull up the toolkit website for you all one more time. So thank you very much for attending and participating there. I did chat that out, so if you look, you'll see a link to the webinar, or sorry, the toolkit. We will post this webinar online as well as send it out to everyone who registered for today's webinar. So thank you very much, and we look forward to working with you, the Ecology Center, and our partners in various states at Safer States have a work group who will work with communities in whichever states we have advocates in working on procurement. So please do contact me if you're interested in working on these issues and you just need a little bit of help. We can help to guide you to who in your community or in your state can be a resource, or I can help you directly. And other folks on our team, you heard from Matt Nod, who's working with us, who has the expertise of developing a policy for a city. So think of us as a resource and reach out, and we look forward to talking with you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.